Well, hi. Welcome to Intellihelp SALON. I have a good friend of mine here today. As I fortunately get to introduce everybody to my good friends here one at a time. It's kind of cool. And Jamie Wheal and I met probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it wasn't in Austin. We discovered we both lived in Austin. We were out of town and at an event. And have subsequently spent a few hours in the swimming pool on a few different days, sharing lots of conversations about life, liberty, religion, God, sex, relationships, marriages, all sorts of interesting things. And he's one of the most fascinating people I know in my life. And I'm thrilled to share him with you. We'll talk a little bit more about who he is and what he does and his new book here in a minute. But let's start where we start every one of these with welcome. And please, Jamie, if you don't mind, tell us 3 people you strongly admire, living or dead, not fictional.
Okay.
And the character traits of them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So my hands down, I think probably all-time hero is Gary Snyder, the poet, mountaineer, ecologist. And the things I value the most about him, I would say, is integrated integrity, that his entire life end to end was made from and drawn from the same conclusions and convictions, plus a ballsy sense of adventure and a deep life of the mind. Then probably Alice Walker, the writer of The Color Purple, for her deep, rootsy wisdom and artistic testimony to the tragedy of the human condition.
Take for a person to be willing to do that. So the character trait behind that, kind of giving that testimony.
I'm probably something like courage, curiosity, and wisdom.
And the third?
It's a toss-up. It's either Ken Kesey or Howard Thurman, and I'm just trying to think which. Let's go with Howard Thurman.
Okay, what are some character traits about him?
That is so interesting. I would say a preeminent connection to source and being totally out of fucks about everything else.
Okay. Something else about him.
Well, actually, I mean, I think his ability to translate transformation.
What is that? What's the desire behind that? What makes a person want to do that? The character trait. That's the outcome. What's the thing behind it?
Well, help me, because it's basically.
For the first one, you said integrity. Like, I got that. Integrity for a person's life. Mm-hmm. That's a character trait. I can latch onto that.
Yep.
So, the honesty, integrity pieces, mm-hmm. And I can see, like, when you pick a climber and a person who loves the nature, that's a reflection of your personality as well. Mm-hmm. That's interesting because you have that in alignment with them. So what makes somebody a person who wants to dive into the world and share and educate others like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's his ability. Like, specifically, it was him taking Gandhi's concept of satyagraha and coining it into soul force, which Dr. King used and everybody is now familiar with. So, like, that ability to translate transformation, help me with what would be an adjective to encapsulate or an ideal to encapsulate that. It's like,
yeah, is it thing?
It's like skillful, compassionate outreach.
And you got to be the original material. Mm-hmm. First, you got to be smart. Like, smart's a character trait, and empathy. You've got to want to translate it and give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you could say generosity of spirit. In a kind of multiple uses of the word.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your background. Give people a little clue into what you've done. Your first book was phenomenal. Stealing Fire. If you haven't picked up Stealing Fire, please do. It's an incredible read.
The new one will wig you out slightly less if you've already ripped the Band-Aid off that one. Yeah.
The new one is Recapture the Rapture. And I was very fortunate to get an advance copy of it as you were writing it.
Well, I was fortunate to get your feedback along the way.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. What got you here?
Well, I mean, I was kind of always a stranger in a strange land. Like, got yanked out of Harry Potter English boarding school at the age of 7 or 8 and then dropped into American culture. My dad was a military test pilot, so it was like Top Gun was kind of like, that was literally our world. And so always found myself going through the customs, rituals, and rites of passage of the American experience and always being on the outside looking in, just not quite getting it or fitting. So that led me to study history and anthropology in undergrad and grad school. And I was really fascinated kind of with like that Guns, Germs, and Steel or Yuval Harari's Sapiens, like how did we get to now? And potentially, especially those days, like, and where did we go wrong? You know, so clash of civilizations, understanding culture, and seeing what other options we had for doing this human thing a little better.
Give folks a little idea of where you grew up and how you got here, around the country, around the world.
Well, first born and raised in England, within sight of Stonehenge is kind of where I grew up, in like total like BBC English countryside kind of bucolic life, and then on the Chesapeake Bay near Annapolis in Maryland, where there was a big naval base. And then as soon as I got out of college, we hightailed it west and went to Boulder and went to grad school there and got into ski patrol and backcountry adventuring, wilderness medicine. And that was the other half of our life, which was just, John Muir, Thoreau, that kind of thing of like just going big in wild, beautiful places.
Because that's a shift, growing up in England where there's barely a hill, to Colorado. Like, when did you go, oh, the mountains call me, I'm going to go do that, the wilderness?
Yeah, well, we always had a stripe of adventure because both my parents had grown up in South Africa. And so that rugged, wild, adventuresome raw, whether it's safari or it's the ocean and the bush, those kinds of things was very much in our family. And my parents had come up skiing in Austria and Switzerland. So when we came to this country, ski trips were always a thing, but it was in the New England and the Northeast, so pretty dingy, icy, not that fun.
Ski hills.
Yeah, and then
I say that insulting because I grew up in Seattle, where it's steep, icy.
Yeah, coastal snowpack, man. You know, what do you got? And then I had the good fortune to watch that Robert Redford, Sidney Pollack film, Jeremiah Johnson.
Oh yeah.
Senior year in college, and I was like, wait a second.
I mean, I think I'm supposed to say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to just go.
Yeah, head top. Watch your top knot. Yeah, that. So, and that was filmed where, that was what inspired him to found the Sundance Film Festival, the Sundance Institute. He fell in love with those mountains, those Wasatch Mountains too. And I was just like, oh my God, the Rocky Mountains.
Matter of fact, we're Jeff Hayes on tomorrow.
Okay.
And Jeff Hayes just did a film with Amy Redford.
Oh, nice.
They just directed. He just executive produced a film that she directed, which that's pretty interesting, with the world so tangentially connected with Summer Phoenix is in it. But the same kind of, they're in that setting, in that Wasatch world.
Well, that was the Revenant before Leo was the Revenant, right? And I just remember there was that old mountain man, that wild and crazy grizzly bear dude. And he's like, the Andes is mere foothills and the Himalayas is for children to play in, but the Rocky Mountains, that's God's country. And I just went straight down the pipes. And I bailed on my application to Yale. I was like, there's no fucking way I'm spending the next 6 years in New Haven, that armpit, of the Northeast. And I just applied to UW because there was a historian there that I super admired, and CU. And that was it. And then basically we just sort of found our way into a super fun, incredibly vibrant, basically psychedelic musical mountain culture of adventure and tight mountain town community.
And out of that, let's make this intellectual transfer, because I guess mountain time is thinking time. How did you get from this interest and tie in or leverage into these belief structures about how people actually behave and moving in? Because a lot of what you do is really behavioral psychology in a way too, and social anthropology, and pulling things apart that the rest of us wish we had the brain power to do. But I think within 30 seconds, someone talking, you can realize, oh, wow, this guy's got an IQ that's like off the charts. And he's probably distilling this so that I can even understand it, which I know is true with you. You're brilliant. But you also have a real talent for expressing this to folks in a way that they can
grok it. So tell me about how the intellectualism and the outdoorsman came together in you, and you've made kind of a life out of both of those.
Yeah, and it's not schizophrenic at all. It's like literally whole cloth, you know. So I've always been super, whatever. I think the technical term is like hyposensitive. Like I need lots of intensity to feel satisfied and settled. I get antsy in the absence of something big and consequential. So it's like turn everything up to 11, right? And I started doing that, and that included, as I said, I mean everything from action sports experiences, so winter in oceans and mountains and those kind of things, gravity sports, to psychedelic experiences, to live music and community and connection and that kind of stuff. And along the way, that actually turns out to be a banging recipe for an incredibly rich life. Music, mountains, mushrooms, and marriage. You basically are like, all right, we're just going to send it, and especially in a community of like-minded folks that are all there for the same reasons and are all pretty skillful and capable. And that's the difference between like coastal hippie culture and kind of what was in the Rocky Mountains between like Jackson to Telluride, right? Which is people would be there dancing at night. You know, they could handle their substances. They knew very few people were loose or sloppy or that. Right. And in the daytime, they were climbing 512s to 514s. They were skiing avalanche chutes. You know, they were paddling class 5 rivers, and they had the rescue skills and the wilderness skills and probably the carpentry skills and the permaculture skills, you know, to do all the things of a fully embodied life. And so you do that and you conduct that experiment, and you're prone to have, a boatload of epiphanies. And along the way, you're like, wait, here's this gestalt insight about life lived experientially, like this moment right here, right now. And I would forever be shuttle running back and forth from above the clouds to in the library stacks, going, now what the ever-living fuck was that about? Like, how did that amazing experience happen? So I really sort of found myself as a sort of accidental neuroanthropologist, which was like, what is it, look around, see something salient or meaningful, go, okay, that's a social pattern. Where else has it occurred across time and space? So then you go look back in the ethnographic literature and you're like, oh, if it's, BDSM, you're like, okay, that's weird. That's a current thing. But then you look back to the penitentes of New Mexico, carrying the cross of Jesus and getting flogged with brine every Easter. They still do it. Right. And you're like, okay, are these connected? Right. And then you connect something else, or didgeridoo playing and circular breathing and the new research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden that, vibrating your nasal cavity massively increases the bliss molecule in your brain, which leads to peak states and non-ordinary states. And you're like, how does this stuff go together? Look through the historical record, spot the commonalities, the deep structures, and this is new, we haven't had this opportunity until probably the last decade really, and then get under the hood of the neuroscience, neurophysiology, and potentially psychology to go, oh, I get it. I get the pattern language underneath these things that connects them all. And then you can invariably project that forward with like, okay, now we're going to want to design experiences, trainings, learning, education, culture, celebration, recreation, whatever. But we now understand how the Lego blocks work, and we understand how they snap together. And we've seen a few examples. So we've got a decent, now we can kind of springboard into something that's forward facing and super fun.
It just triggered a memory for me that actually, I remember the first time I saw you, you actually walked on a teaching stage at a big bathwater event, and we did a breathing exercise.
Oh yeah,
and
which is in this book. That was the beginning.
Yeah, and it was funny to me because you were, I think, and as I recall, there was is it the laughing gas? What would you?
It was oxygen and nitrous oxide.
Nitrous oxide. Okay, well, and there's probably nobody that is watching this. There's no surprise that this is the whippets culture, that there is this thing in the world. And I remember as a teenager being like having these experiences, and you asked in the room, had anybody ever done this? And nobody had. And I raised my hand. I'm like, yeah, I've done this a bunch of times. And it was like,
I think I did. I don't remember.
I'm like, yeah, this was actually, and people are like, really, you've done this? And I'm like, yeah, we used to do this a lot when I was young. But there was that skipped a whole generation because drugs were not particularly prevalent, and maybe marijuana was in our community, but I wasn't a pot smoker. But that seemed like a very innocent, short trip drug. Talk a little bit about these suspension moments in altering brain chemistry in the short term before we get to this. Because I think it's fascinating for folks as they hear a person who's like Yale bound and has gone to great lengths to get knowledge and education in all these areas and crossbreeding that. There's a little bit of Timothy Leary in you too, in the best way possible. So give a little insight about toying with oxygen levels in the brain and brain chemistry and even mushrooms or any of that.
Well, I mean,
because this has all been that kind of like to me is like 5 or 6 years new in my life of understanding that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for starters, I mean, University of Chicago comparative religion kind of pioneer in the field, Mircea Eliade, called them archaic techniques of ecstasy.
Okay.
Right. So when you look back in the past, now you see how did humans shift state to
like shamans type stuff,
to discharge trauma, to prompt connection, to connect with the sublime or the numinous or the divine, whatever it would be. Like, I mean, humans have always had radio knobs for the dials of consciousness.
Right. And
then it just so happened that in the last 300-400 years, ours got rusted shut on one setting. And it's a highly focused setting. It's a laser beam setting, which is, executive function, prefrontal cortical activity, beta wave neuroelectrics, high focus, highly linguistic, often abstract consciousness, empirical, 5 senses only.
Right.
So trance, possession, dreams, none of those things count. Those are all figments of your imagination or repressions of your unconscious, those kind of things, or synaptic brain farts. Right. And what I think we're simply coming to and understanding these days is just that we are healthier and we have more access to information and inspiration. We can discharge micro PTSD. We can connect more profoundly and meaningfully with each other when we just degunge those dials and we expand the range of consciousness that we can access. And we can do that by those techniques of ecstasy. Obviously, the archaic ones are in the past, but we obviously have contemporary ones. And those things are as simple as respiration and embodiment, like what we can do with our body to shift how we feel and align health, vibrancy, resiliency, or even state shift, right? You can play with your vagal nerve tone. You can do all those things. Sexuality, substances, and music. And you can kind of those are the building blocks that are most common and most potent and lowest tech, right? So if you're trying to come up with solutions that can work around the world for anybody, anywhere, it's got to be cheap or free, right? And, the latest whiz-bang headset or AR thing or whatever it be, those are instantly exclusive.
Right.
So once you do that, you realize, there's very specific IP addresses for certain states of consciousness. And we tend to steer almost exclusively from our psychology. Mm-hmm. We think about our feelings and our thoughts and the linguistically encoded narratives we tell to support our feelings and our thoughts or validate them, right? Versus taking almost a biomechanical approach to ourselves. Like we're a human system, biopsychosocial, right? And if we learn how to move those knobs and levers, we can change the channels of our interior experience versus stumbling and bumbling through our interior experiences, trying to tell better or more adaptive stories. And once you do that, you're like, okay, so now I can change my brain waves, I can change my heart rate variability, I can change my hormonal or endocrine saturation and system, I can change my respiratory rate, my posture, I can even run different psychological maps and models and software of how I make sense of things, right? And when I do that, there's just super fun, much more rad places to go and know, and what would, from a very square point of view, be classified as non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? But they are really just additional and optional states of consciousness. And, and this is where at the end of the book, I had to stick my neck out because it didn't seem, what's the word? Honest, I suppose, not to spotlight the elephant. He may not be in the room, but he's at least outside, which is, once you get good at that and you're like, I'm regularly accessing these different IP addresses to get to different states of consciousness, neurophysiological set points, and access to information and meaning making, then you're like, okay, well, where's all that information coming from? once you get over the novelty,
where is all that information coming
is
from?
this even possible, and can we do it? And then like, oh shit, yes we can. And in fact, we can now repeat it enough, we start trusting it, and working with it. Then you're like, and you start mapping that terrain. That in some respects I think it's the most interesting question that nobody's asking these days, which is like, if you look back all through human history, in every single culture, I mean, every single is a strong word, but in a pile of culture, there's some accounting and some phrasing or languaging or explanation of when people are hit with inspiration. Yeah. Like the ancient Greeks, it was the muses. Yeah. Right. And in fact, I think Elizabeth Gilbert gave a great TED talk about that, where she's like, we've become very self-absorbed and almost prideful as creatives these days. Yeah. Like, I've got writer's block, or I've come up with that song lyric, versus the muses like, no. There's something divine. They come sit on your shoulder. If you anger them, they'll ice you. If you please them, they'll bless you. And it's not yours. You're merely a conduit. Yeah.
You're the radio. I know we say this all the time here, you're a radio. And yes. You can tune into all of these things in all of these different ways. I think that there was a puritanical fear, still is in many ways, but 40 years ago, it was, if you do that, you're hippies. Or you're just hippies doing drugs. And we have upcoming episodes that we're doing here we're going to do one with Mark Fox on crop formations.
Oh, wow.
And how they present in our world. And most people have a predisposition to believe they are one thing. Mm-hmm. The evidence shows there's something far different than what we've all been taught. And we have someone doing a segment with us on remote viewing. Mm. And people thought, oh, that's ESP. And I realized, well, the more people that...
I watch Stranger Things, man. I'm down with that.
The more people that you find out, it actually is not the people you think would be talented. Some of the people in the CIA and at Berkeley that were doing this and are still doing it were the staff. Like the secretary turned out to be really good at it and super accurate. And the accuracies cannot be argued with. This is real, that we're able to tune our radio. And some of this is just through thought and wavelength. Some of it's through, I'll say, an altered state, whether it's a chemical reaction. And then you have folks that are, and we have some coming up on that are around DMT and therapies where people are using what you would consider, I guess, drugs are to access memories and untie things that psychotherapists take years and years and years to do. And they're doing it in a matter of sessions and unwinding their past because they're able to fully utilize parts of their mind. And I'll say all of those things are connected in people that are utilizing their minds as a piece of machinery in a way that it's never been done before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and to put a point on your inquiry, like how did the passions in my life braid together? It was fundamentally this. It was like if I was going to write an autobiography, it would pretty much probably be called like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Right. So getting lobbed into experiences that were completely novel and fantastical and often quite high stakes and consequential, like balls deep, right? And then you're like, okay, now who talks about this stuff? And then you'd look around and you'd be like, oh, a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing whack nuts is who talks about this stuff. That's not my tribe. So I'm out. Right. But then on the other hand, you've had a direct, unfiltered, and I would say unpremeditated, like it should just happen. You didn't go looking for it. Yep. There wasn't a priori confirmation bias. Right?
Yeah, I didn't things appear in life when you're ready for them. And there's often a lot of, I'll say, providence in that. Like, oh, that thing presented itself at this moment. I probably couldn't have accepted it at another time, but weird that I'm thinking about it and here it is.
I mean, there were definitely times I felt like sort of Harry Potter, like where Harry's kind of he's an idiot savant. Like he doesn't actually know what he's about. And then things just happen to him or for him. Like suddenly the sword of Gryffindor appears in his hands because he doesn't know he's the actual heir to it. But like, just in time, Sonny, here you go. Right. Or the phoenix feather because he actually loved Dumbledore. Like that was kind of my experience, was just constantly. And so my philosophy stayed, because I mean, my father was military test pilot. Like he would get 500-page books on physics just filled with equations for Christmas and sit in the corner and read that shit, like absolutely. So like that, I suppose, stayed in my core as far as DNA. So I've just become, I think, what you could best describe as like an agnostic Gnostic. Like the Gnostic, having had deep, profound experiences I cherish and have built my life around, and agnostic, what the fuck do I know? And that looks deep and vast and infinite. So just kind of an open-ended curiosity to keep just trying to, F the ineffable, as Doug Adams said, right?
Do you want to start with Stealing Fire and just give a quick spin on that before we get to this book?
Sure.
Just to give a frame set to folks.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what was the state of the world? What was the problem that you went, I got to write this book? I have to communicate this to the world.
Well,
what did you communicate?
I think it was kind of twofold. I mean, one was, it was pretty much the first 20 years of exactly the story I was just describing. It was my love letter to this hidden, invisible lineage that seems to bubble up and down across time and culture of the kind of Prometheans, right? Of the people who were stealing fire from the gods and then seeding these explosions in innovation, creativity, culture. And then in my own life, I noticed increasingly from like 2012 or 14, somewhere around there, to roughly 2016, that there was this fundamentally a global circuit of Illuminati tech nomads. And that the old, like, you're in the country club or you belong to YPO or these kind of like very place-based, fixed, community-based power structures and hierarchies had been completely replaced by this traveling circuit between TED, Davos, Art Basel, Burning Man, South by Southwest, Coachella. You just, and you'd see the same goddamn people at all the same places, but then that community would splooge out as well. I was at the UN and there was this long table dinner after one of the sessions, and it was just, I mean, people running NGOs, people having government access, all this kind of stuff, and they were and it was based on plant medicine, and they were all describing their experiences in the rainforest of Peru, or, and then 3 weeks later...
The ayahuasca world?
Yeah, 3 weeks later but then also translating that into ocean conservation, translating that into cannabis initiatives in Jamaica, translating into like pro-social, actual stuff. And then 3 weeks later is Burning Man, and pretty much the end of the table was like, well, we'll see you all in a few weeks on the other coast in a totally different environment.
It's a version of a club. So, there's going to be a lot of people that watch this. And Jack was here last week, Canfield, and he we talked for a minute because he was the first person I ever heard the word ayahuasca from. And 20 years ago when I met him. And I was like, you're doing what? It's like, I'm going to the jungle in South America, and I'm like, you're going to do what?
To see a man about
an
and
I'm sweat lodge. What the hell? And so but still, there is help the listener here, the viewer that's on the other side of that fence who hasn't been there, hasn't seen this, and you know me, I put stuff in about as simple terms as I can understand it. Get me over the fence of, it's just a bunch of people doing drugs. What is going on? What is that? Swing that door open for us and let us take a peek.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that not to get fixated on the specific mechanisms of action, like the doorways. So if drugs are a doorway, or sexuality is a doorway, or music and electronic music, take your pick, right? Those all have very strong social filters around them, and then entrenched taboos. But rather than saying we shouldn't consider them because they're taboo, we should actually, back to the neuroanthropology, we should actually double click on them precisely because they have taboos. You're like, oh, whoa, this has got all sorts of warding and fencing and tripwires around it. There must be a bomb at the center. Let's look at it. Right. And so that was really the premise of Stealing Fire, was to say, hey, there's this underground revolution. It's happening all around us. It's happening with Kundalini yoga happening in yoga strip malls, like it's happening with, like, there's a broadening of more and more people basically, busting those radio dials open and seeking more far-ranging experience, including like the whole biohacking paleo thing, like intermittent fasting, contrast therapy, like super hot, super cold, all these kinds of things, right? Breathing, hyperventilating, all this kind of stuff. People are desperate for more rich experience. And really the point of that book was just to say, hey, it's happening. It's happening in action sports. It's happening with all sorts of neat categories of like psychology, biology, technology, and pharmacology. And they're all coming together to create a much broader palette of experience. And that's increasing our inspiration, our ability to heal, and our ability to connect and cooperate with each other. So that's the kind of TLDR on that book.
Yeah. You mentioned the club nature of the Davos and the Coachella, and I want to just divert for a second and talk about that. Like, where do you land on? You have this kind of existing structure, power base of folks that are Davos related, like the Klaus Schwabs of the world and the Windsor family and these banks and Gates and all of those folks. Then you have cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
You have these folks.
The pirates.
These guys that are generating new money, new chunks of wealth that did not exist before, which is essentially liquidating cash from this pool and pulling it over and stacking the cash in this pool. And with that will come a power balance. Like, these folks do not want that to happen forever. How do you see that? How do you see this explosion in blockchain and cryptocurrency and new wealth and new industries of the technocrats and the tech junkies against that prior framed European house banking community?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to be clear, like that kind of subculture that I was just describing, the kind of tech nomads, right? They skew far more on the blockchain side. They're heavily, even if they are children of privilege or inheritors or earners of power and prominence in social networks. So I'd almost say that's kind of old guard versus new. And that I think if there is a secret sauce to the new God, it's also its Achilles heel, but is shared ecstatic experience, right? These shared ritual behaviors that bond them together as shared initiates in a something, right? And what happens now? I think, to me, the biggest question is does that community actually act on that which they've been shown? Or does it just end up one latest example of bourgeois bohemian dilettantism? And they're really just, fiddling while Rome burns at the party at the end of time. And so, to me, the ethic of connection, commitment, and actually being willing to dismantle the very system that puts you on the top of it is a much smaller subset than the folks that want to show up for the baddest ass bash, and the party of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting next 5 years to watch this power play balance out. How it does. I mean, I have a feeling that these digital currencies will be federalized. A fence will be put around them, and it'll be like, okay, here's the ones we can play with. The rest of them are contraband. You can move your contraband into the system, and here's the date you can do it. Otherwise, you might as well be on Silk Road trading heroin with that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just banks and tanks, right? I mean, and render unto Caesar. I don't think that I'm aware of any militarized nation state that is willing to just let 30 to 50% of its tax base walk out the door and set up a floating raft and call it
PayPal
and call it seasteading and say, you're not the boss of me, right? Like, I don't think that's going to fly.
Yeah, it's not. I don't either. It's really interesting. So when you started on Recapture the Rapture, let's segue into the problem that you saw here that said, I got to write a book about this. This book has 3 distinct sections in it, and we'll talk. I want you to go through each one of them.
Okay.
But when you sat back and you went, I got to put this on paper. What was the motivation that said, here's the big idea, I've got to put it on paper?
I mean, I think it was just a sort of dawning awareness, again, probably sort of 2014 to 16, somewhere in there, just noticing the trends. And yeah, I would say absolutely Brexit and the 2016 election, the intensifying of all fractions and fissures was, where's the moderate, reasonable, integrative voices here? And that the mic has been hijacked by extremes of both poles. And then even the possibilities for hope, or like the sort of the rallying stories that were emerging, were all explicitly rapturous. They were all problematic. They were 1% solutions. could be for the religious saved. It could be for the fellow billionaires. It could be for the meritocratic, brightest and most beautiful. But however you slice it, they're all 1% solutions that say our current world is not redeemable or savable. There's an inflection point coming where everything's going to change, and we can kind of see it from here. Like we're heralding it, we're beckoning it in. On the other side of the inflection point, everyone who's with me, we come up roses. We're actually better off, right? We get to our utopia, we get to our happily ever after. So send it full speed off the cliff, no skid marks. Don't worry about the collateral damage, right? And anybody who's not part of us is simply collateral damage. We're not trying to solve for all of humanity anymore. So it really felt like to me, we're all suffering.
And there's a lot of that.
Oh, so much of it.
Like that's one of the things that I think is really, I think technology is really aided in that conversation of going, hey, everybody's got a microphone. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got a stage and has 5 minutes. And we used to have fractures in society by maybe political party, or even there were churches that had 15 flavors of Christianity or whatever that was. But now everybody's got their own flavor of everything. And we talk about in branding how consumers go out online and they're like, hey, I'm a Lululemon wearing, Prius driving, Bikram yoga. And they cultivate a personality for themselves out of these fragmented brands. But they're doing this in politics and in religion and in faith and in belief and all this intersectionality of society. And you go, is there anything to be made out of all of these pieces? Mm-hmm. It's just pieces and pieces and pieces of people identifying as this. And is there any opportunity for connection when you are identifying yourself as this with anybody else? Are we getting to a place where we can't, there will be no more collective?
Yeah, they just the atomization of rational individualism and hyper-consumerism. Right?
Where go from here?
Well, I mean,
we have this moment where we're about to have AI. We're all that's being introduced to the world, and so that's a better sorting mechanism that drives that problem even faster, possibly. Or does it give us a digital god that we're going to bow down to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the kind of the neuroanthropology of it all. It's like diagnosing, hey, we are rapidly evolving primates. And the E.O. Wilson, that Harvard biologist, said, Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. That's our current situation. And you think about literally 24 hours in a day for all of life on Earth. Anatomically, modern man rolls in at 4 seconds before midnight, and cave paintings show up at 1 second before midnight. Right. Yeah, you're like, holy shit. Okay, right. Let's just give ourselves a fat ass mulligan and all admit we have no idea what we're doing. Right. And so along the way, in this hockey stick of the last century, let's just say, the rate of change has become, not surprisingly, exponential, and we are losing and abandoning many core behaviors, practices, cultural, guidelines that used to be present in any kind of traditional, multi-generational, relatively intact society. I mean, obviously change has always been happening, but the rate of change has gone through the roof.
Oh, I look at from, let's say, 1400 to 1900. Horses, carts, carriages, stagecoaches, iron tools. My grandmother was born in a time where there were 2 ruts down the middle of the road in South Dakota that were from
the wagons.
And then the first cars came down that road, then the first electricity, then the first refrigerator, then the first light bulb, then
all the things.
But she lived to see the internet, and
holy moly,
she lived in that window of 1910 to 2010. That was the window she lived in.
And the Dakotas were probably a bit of a time warp. You probably bought yourself another decade there.
And then she became a nurse, and then one of the first flight attendants at Northwest Airlines.
Holy moly.
Because they had to be nurses when we first put human beings in airplanes, passengers. But to have seen all of that, that's most of the technology in the world happened in her lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we are
It's
having
very recent.
Technological innovation and mutation. It's fragmenting and fracturing what we perceive as our culture, and we've probably dropped a lot of key nutrients that we actually need to be healed and connected and healthy and vibrant. So to your point about like the algorithmically induced atomization into just we're all our own personal brands and avatars bumbling around the world, exchanging energy credits for more material things that we cloak and garb and skin our avatars in real life and in virtual worlds.
To be important, which makes us absolutely insignificant.
Yeah.
The result of it is the opposite of what you want it to be.
Yeah, it's just some basic old school stuff.
Yeah.
How do we get together and how do we basically weep and worship? And and it can take secular forms. It could be Soul Cycle. It could be a Tony Robbins event.
Right.
Right. It could be something like that in interactive theater, Sleep No More. Like I've just had my mind blown in this kind of weird experiential ritual-like bit of performance. I don't know quite what that is, but it's,
I'm unfamiliar with that. What is that?
It's literally, I think it's a retelling of Macbeth in New York City. It's actually become basically the genre-breaking new innovation like Meow Wolf has been for art museums.
Okay.
Right? And it's, you go in and you're just in the midst of a multi-floor restaurant, hotel, speakeasy, something or other / stage set, and you can't tell who's in the story and in the script versus who are participants. And then there's this unfolding in a postmodern retelling of Shakespeare. So there's lines and there's quotes, but then there's levels of secrets like Rocky Horror Picture Show. So if you know who to ask, or if you get lucky and you sit at the bar that night, but not the night before, you're going to get something whispered in your ear, or you're going to get some interaction or engagement. And they've just nailed it. It's now in West End in London. It's taken on huge amounts of funding.
Oh, my.
Just fascinating, right?
Oh, yeah.
So just, bottom line is back now looking forwards.
We're seeing being alive.
Yes. And again, like I said, Wim Hof and ice baths and hyperventilating and going hungry and, and all that stuff, I think are our attempts to reboot our experiential parameters and not the least of which are, rituals of atonement, connection, and communion. Like if we don't have a way to process our grief, we get what we've got right now. We've just got culture flame wars, riots in the street, everybody on a hair trigger, just looking to just unload on whoever is the nearest, even approximate target, because they need to discharge it from their systems.
Right.
Versus like, we can engage in batch forgiveness, right? Yeah. Like how it's always been done. Like wipe the slate clean. And
every kind of form of religion in the world has that Day of Atonement a year, whether it's what are the color festival in India,
Kumbh Mela or something else. It's something else, isn't it?
Yeah, what's that called? It escapes me, but
it's not Diwali, is it?
Yeah, no, that's Festival of Lights. Mm-hmm. At any rate, they got stolen by the color run folks, and they commercialized it. That
just Instagram the shit out of it, man.
Yeah, right. The Jewish faith has always had that. Every faith has this. Hey, this is the day once a year you wipe the slate clean, but we're not getting that anymore. We're getting, hey, this is my opportunity once a year to go attack somebody, and let's all plan this on this weekend, and it's ugly. We're getting to. How act inhuman towards each other and seeming to enjoy it in many, many ways. Yeah. And how do we get to healing that?
That was really the inspiration for the book, which was it felt like we're all just sort of hurtling into increasing metasystemic crisis and really, really feeling the tragedy of the world. Right, the tragedy of historic imbalances and injustices, the tragedy of our own resource degradation and depletion, the tragedy of the absolutely unequal distribution of resources around the world to our supposed fellow humans, right? And the tragedy of, oh shit, we might be out of time, or oh shit, my best laid plans for my best life may not get to come true because there's shifting sands and changing conditions. Like, imagine our grandparents, right? World War I, the Depression, World War II. Like, I guarantee you their 20s did not map to what they thought they were gonna.
Yeah.
just to be like, it is entirely likely as a human to be swept up in the tides of history.
Yeah.
We've been in this little sweet bubble from 1946 until 2008, let's say.
Yeah.
And we kind of took that as a norm instead of probably the flukiest patch of stability and prosperity, at least in the West, that has ever existed anywhere on the planet.
Yep. Yeah. It was just relatively goodness after goodness for folks, and a seeming descent from violent culture into comfort culture.
Yeah.
And we often say America's built on individualism, but it became so much individualism. We've gotten to the point where the other people don't matter. It's just, there was the me generation, and then the look at me, then now we're kind of at the there's nobody but me generation. And we look at our leaders, and it's easy to pick on politicians at the moment. And I won't pick a particular flavor of politician, because they all do this. Is they're able to bark. That our leaders used to say, hold on, I've got a calm answer. Here's a solution. Now the leaders are the ones with the pitchforks and the torches going, no, get them. And you're like, whoa, that's become a form of leadership now, that inciting.
I think it's just performative demagoguery, right?
Yeah.
That they're not actually, half the time, they're not even speaking to the people they're shouting at. They are speaking to the news chyron at 7 that if they say something incendiary enough, they're certain it's going to get picked up by sympathetic outlets and lapped around their voter base.
Yep.
So now they're just bombing the situation.
Which makes it quite a job.
Oh, my stars.
It's employment.
Yeah, no, it's out of hand. And I think that's really important, that on both sides of the political spectrum, if you see the voices that are loudest right now, there is a degree of stamping of feet and an expression of frustration of like, I've been sold a bill of goods, or what I expect. My needs aren't being met. My expectations aren't being met, right? And you see that in alt-right nationalists, you see that in social justice activists, the idea that like we should expunge any action or any behavior or any writing or any decision by anybody in centuries past for not living up to our current evolving standards. Right, of equity and inclusion. You're like, well, wait, have you watched Game of Thrones? Have you studied any history at all? Like life has always been absolutely ruthless and brutal and wildly unjust. And we've been getting better at it. We're in no way done. But like, you cannot do the Wayback Machine and get to some idyllic past where the things that you value were more true.
Yeah.
Right? And the same with the alt-right.
When you can't get to a place either where you go, hey, we're going to hold everybody who's dead accountable, or us accountable for them and their behaviors, but we're not going to hold each other accountable for our behaviors now.
Well, that's what I mean about I mean this sort of technically, like developmentally, not pejoratively, like slamming it, but it's a juvenile response. It's literally young. It's not yet taking responsibility and agency for what do I do as a consenting adult, as a citizen, as whatever my roles and responsibilities are. How ought I show up?
Yeah.
And my sense is that excuse me, is that both sides of our current culture wars, right, are feeling they've been sold a bill of goods. Right. And if you look at the alt-right nationalist kind of role, it's, hey, man, I thought this was a white Protestant Christian nation made by us and for us, and I was born on third base, and don't tell me I didn't hit a triple. Right.
Yep.
And now I'm running smack dab into effectively, I'll say this in quotes, which is, a bunch of uppity brown folks looking to cut the line. Right. And it's like, wait a second. And, there was that funny Twitter quote. I don't remember who originated, but it was basically saying, when you're used to unconscious privilege, equality can feel like oppression. Yeah. So that's that, it's a gross caricature, but that's that plot. And on the social justice side, there's that sense of, we were raised, and this is distinct, I think, from the 60s. Basically, it ends in 68, right? It ends with the death of King. Yep. Right. And there's this break in that lineage. And then you get younger activists who've been raised in academia as well as contemporary civil society with the promise of a multicultural post-racial society. You've got Beyonce, you've got Barack Obama, you've got all the things. And then wait, I can't breathe. Like, wait, what? Like those patterns, those persistent inequities, and then many people being ahistorical and not knowing the history of redlining, not knowing the history of environmental racism, not knowing the, failed Reconstruction, not knowing any of that, and then being shocked, like people reading Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States and going, oh my God, I didn't know, therefore you must not have ever known.
Right.
Versus, and so my sense is that both of our sides, both of our extremes are running smack dab from, we had a pre-tragic story that was supposed to work out for us, right? We were promised a rose garden. We're now running into the tragic, complicated realities of our current meta crisis, right? And we are thrashing about. And the move, and this is the whole premise of the book, right? Which is, can we get to the post-tragic stance? Can we actually, instead of rejecting what's happening, can we actually embrace it, understand it, and accept it, and take responsibility for what happens?
So walk
next?
me through that.
Well,
so
yeah.
How do we get there? From where we are, at which is apparent mayhem on the verge of worse mayhem.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the answers are always in our text. The answers are in our history. So if we look around and we say, okay, when have things been super tight? When has there been clamorings for increasing equity in the world? Just however you want to cut it, right? Sure. You look at the Gandhis, you look at the Mandelas, you look at the Kings, and there's a reason those three are always cited together, right? Is that each one of them basically avoided mass bloodshed and leveled up and resolved an intractable conflict filled with so much pain, suffering, hate, and grievance that it had defied everyone forever up till then. And they held a higher, clearer tone for the people they led and even for their adversaries.
Yeah.
And they leveled up to that post-tragic. They said, we're not going to diminish or dismiss or pretend or deny the horrendousness that I hold on behalf of my people. And I'm going to play a card of love, compassion, forgiveness, transformation instead of retribution. And so that's my sense, is that I just think that, back to your marketing point, the era of the hyper-atomized, fragmented, rational individual consumer identity has led us to just have incredibly short, impatient, self-serving timelines of reality. Of I want to get mine, and I want to get mine right now. And if I don't get mine ever, I'm just going to rage. And if I don't get it immediately, I'm even more pissed off. Versus, hey, I might not get mine. We might not get ours yet. But I'm going to carry water as far as I can in my stretch of this relay race.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, like, we just came up on the first anniversary, now a month beyond the anniversary of finding Intellihelp, creating that.
Yeah.
And that was the only sense making I could do at the moment, was going, hey, COVID came and there was more breakdown at that moment. Like, there was more fear. Like, how bad is this going to get? What is this going to be?
It was tight.
And I'm not sure it's any better now. It's getting weirder, and like,
it's getting weirder.
It's getting weirder. And like, I'm looking at how we're talking about inoculations being able to open this up, and we're like pointing towards opening up, and these rules, and Canada's tightened down under lockdowns, and India's got more.
Yeah, India, Brazil, like total stark-raving shit shows.
Absolutely. And so you go, I don't even know what to believe, but being able to take the one action of going, okay, I'm going to feed somebody today.
Yeah.
Like, that is all, as simple as I'm a simple person. That's all I could think of was, what if I just help somebody? What if you help somebody? What if we just started helping each other and just put all the political BS aside for a minute and
old school?
Like, I don't care where you are on the spectrum, the rainbow, the political. Let's feed somebody. Mm-hmm. Somebody's hungry. Somebody needs to get food. And can we? Is it that simple? Do we have to start in places that simple at the moment?
It's just that old Tom Waits line, right? Mercy's a business, but we all got to eat. Right? So let's not trip over. We don't need, I think it's critical that we don't actually need to agree on everything to get started on what must be done. And we can almost play the game of like, how big is your sphere of concern? Like, do you only care about this neighborhood? Okay, we'll do a neighborhood watch together or a community garden. Do you only care about this city? Okay, we'll start trying to solve the homeless crisis or the water issues, right? Do you only care about our nation? Great. let's fucking march together.
Yeah.
Right. And or maybe it's all sentient beings. Maybe you're way into animal rights. Maybe you're into global ecology. Like, how big is your sphere of concern? And then let's just find the outer limit where our circles overlap and just choose from that bottomless list of stuff that needs doing with love, creativity, courage, and compassion. And let's just agree on that.
Yeah. And again, in this endeavor, we've gone, we work very hard to be politically agnostic because it's not useful to have politics involved in feeding people. And I get the opportunity now to talk to people that are in positions of political power, both sides. And they'll call and they'll hear our story. Well, if you're in a position of political power, to your point earlier, what's the buzz going to be on the news tonight? What's the clip? Like, they're always thinking, should I even be aligned with you in the first place? Is it a mistake for me to even be talking to you? Because where am I going to be perceived as your initiative helping me politically or not?
Sure.
It's a huge thing.
They're mostly just transactional. That's all.
It's just there is not an initial thing of being transcendent. It's about being transactional. So they're trying to feel you out. And I get through the kind of the spiel of what Intellihelp is and how this works. And there's this question of, what would you like me? Okay, so what would you like from me? How can I help you? And my answer is always the same. I'm not going to tell you. If you heard me, you already know what you can do. And if I ask for something, you're not going to want to give me that, because that's me asking for something. You've already got something.
How's that gone? That's some Jedi shit.
What can you say?
Well, what do they say? Are they so shallow that you just shorted their circuits, or do they actually drop a level and give you an honest answer?
They go, as I was talking, you already know of 2 or 3 people that can help me. I want those names and I want those connections.
Oh, so you do follow up. You bottom line
absolutely.
Oh, so you just do the pattern interrupting.
And then they go, here's the name, and they give you the names, and they go, that's fantastic. I want to make sure, because lots of people have these conversations and there's no follow through. So I want to make sure that we get the commitment and the follow through to make those meetings. So can we?
Dude, they go out to their Lincoln Town car that shits up on blocks.
No,
they were at Ron's house. They didn't even know what happened.
They're like, okay, yeah. Oh, and so then, like yesterday, I was on a call, and Tracy Phelps was on. She'd arranged this call with this person who has a lot of political influence in the state of Texas, and they were like, okay. And I'm very honest, because I like these people. They're nice people. If you can get all of the BS out of the way and go,
yes,
can we have a meal together and actually just go break bread and have a conversation about how these things work? And I don't care if they're left, they're right, they're center. I don't want to have a conversation about what won't work, because that's not a useful conversation. What can you do towards this goal of feeding people and getting jobs in America? Because if you're not for feeding people and getting jobs in America, I don't know who you are. Like, those are 2 basic things that we can all agree on. And if we can't agree on that, everybody has to say yes to that. So great. How can you help in that? That's all I want.
Yeah. I think it's just reminding ourselves and each other of the better angels of our nature. Like, and to your point about like politicization, I mean, I think it's really critical to know we're probably all suffering shell shock and amnesia. But like, prior to 2015, there had been, and it was increasingly fragmenting. It wasn't like roses then, but prior to then, there was a shared American identity, and key, particularly national leaders, but quite often regional leaders, would pluck the strings, right, of the American experiment and our shared unity. And of course, now that can get dismissed and ridiculed as Whig propaganda, of like Schoolhouse Rock and that kind of thing. But you're like, no, even if it was an idealistic pipe dream, wildly separated from a lot of contradictory evidence, right? It was nonetheless the thing we returned to. And you go back to George Bush after 9/11, right? He explicitly went and said, our Muslim neighbors, our friends, our fellow citizens, that is what makes this country great. Like he was judging this of like, oh man, Japanese internment camps, that was a black eye on America.
Oh,
right. Understandable in the initial like fear of Pearl Harbor and submarines, recon submarines on the Pacific coast. Like it wasn't out of nowhere. But on the other hand, retrospectively, you're like, man, we could have done better.
We could have done a lot better.
Right? So he steps up then, which would have been a time for absolute, jihad and crusade, fracturing this country. And instead, a Republican conservative pluck those strings. Obama did it off the church shootings, right? That whole, it's a return back to Lincoln. It's a return back to the Gettysburg Address. It's like, hey, we got to dust this thing off. We got to double down. I mean, in the midst of true carnage, right? And we got to remember the better angels of our nature. And so that's, to me, and you're modeling it, right? With let's not make it more complicated than
I don't think we're not doing it in a sophisticated way. I mean, all just sophisticated, but the message and the action is very simple.
I think we just need to start by starting. And some of us, I think, it's like the whole self-esteem thing with parenting and kids. Like, you don't actually create self-esteem in your kids by telling them the fucking sun shines out their ass. You know, they get self-esteem by trying and succeeding and failing and trying again at hard things they're proud of. And the same with us. Like
you get character.
I mean, my sense is, a lot of people, and I make the case in the book, which is, hey, we've really got to expand our perspective to a global point of view, right? And particularly people in personal development, consciousness space, whatever, right? Will often be like, yeah, we all need to become, we're all one world, etc. But like the pragmatist in me thinks, you know what? I think we had a really good run at that, folks, and I think we got as far as we got. Right? Like, again, like Age of Aquarius, baby boomers, personal growth, me generation, all of it. Like, we had from 1965 to 2000, to now. And we pretty much didn't get the project done under the best of conditions, relatively speaking. Therefore, let's keep globalism as our aspirational goal and the capacities that definitely a bunch of problem solvers need to be holding. But let's actually go, we're going through the floorboard, so let's roll with it, which is, let's go back to what's healthy tribalism. And I think the only healthy tribalism that we can, or not the only, but for sure, potentially the most pro-social and doable and relevant, is community. It's not race, color, or creed. It's not ideologies.
Let's dive in there, because I know people are going to hear that, and they're going to hear the word tribalism, and they're going to relate it to race.
Well, I think of, there's for sure ethno-tribalism, but there's also ideological tribes, right, as we see on the news channels, right? And the reality is, and we here in Austin, right, we experienced this with the snowfall and the power outages and all those kinds of things, which is, end of the day, man, it's friends and neighbors.
Yep.
It's circle wagons. And, Brock Long, the head of FEMA, had said, just 2 years ago, this was, I think it was right in between a hurricane that hit Florida, and then it was just about to roll, and a different one was just about to roll into Houston. I think that was the window. And he said, hey, America, you've got to stop thinking of FEMA as a 911 service, right? We are not on every single call. We do not have the resources. We do not have the funding. You're on your own.
Yeah.
Right. And so the whole volunteer fire department, July the 4th parades, Halloween, in your hood, like, how many of us even know or break bread with neighbors in cookie cutter suburban tract developments where we're all busy and we're pinballing around between, obviously not this year, but, busy commuting, busy listening to podcasts, always have our headphones in, like, no porches, no accidental collisions, like, just to dust that off. And say, hey, neighborhood, where does our water come from? Hey, where does our power come from? Who has medicine? Who has food and resources? Like, and those things you can't rush into. That has to be built via the connective tissue, right? Of day-to-day micro encounters and small deposits in the trust accounts and that kind of stuff. But also some sense of shared story that says this is who we are. This is an identity that we have opted into together. And start doing stuff from there.
And finding commonality in things that we like. It's interesting that I think that this period of, I'll call it the COVID year, I know, right? So when you start doing the math for some, like I was calculating, I was taking a shower earlier, I'm like, oh, this has now been, I'm in my 50s, 2% of my life has been in the COVID years. That's
Oof. Yeah.
Right? And for these young folks, like, Sam here it's double that. It's 4% for him because he's half my age. Like, wow.
That could feel much longer.
That makes it sound like a number, right? Like so now who knows how much longer this is going to go. But I saw the Nextdoor app take off during this period. Like it existed, but now you're seeing people on Nextdoor app and there's some lunacy there. It's entertaining, but you at least are seeing some community and some connection people like talking in this geo-targeted fashion to their neighbors. And I think that there's a solution to be had, and I don't mean the solution, a tool for what you're talking about technologically to really start to communicate with the people around you and go, let's create some
local tribalism here and rely on each other, and maybe take the headphones off and start communicating and have the barbecue and have the cultural exchange between neighbors, and devote some time. And I think that's one of the things that we, that's, they always say kids spell love time, is can we spend some time together as human beings and connect in a physical, tangible way? Because we've lost that. We've really lost it.
Yeah. And I mean, and obviously, like, it's all fine and good when resources are abundant. It's in the tough times, right? I mean, we had some neighbors pop by in the middle of the snowstorm and be like, can we borrow half a dozen eggs? And the first thought was like, well, wow, that's a lot of eggs. And then also like, well, how many do we have? And then how long do we model this is going to be before we can get more eggs? Because we're definitely not banking on your borrowing of them, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. And if we ever saw them again, it would be out of this particular resource constraint window. So to me, like, if it's all gone to I'm going to get mine, right? Then the moment you get anywhere near, just basically stack ranking access to who gets what. Like if you think of like a volunteer fire department, like, people's pipes burst and they're just dishing out water. Well, is there a line around the VFW? Did you get there first? How many do you get to take? Did you leave enough for everybody? If you were first and there was some to grab, but you look at the line, you're like, well, not everyone's going to get as many as I can get. Do you take yours anyway? Like those were always quite strong checks and balances in traditional societies. And if you were part of your village or community and you were an excess taker, there would be a whisper campaign. It would come back to your wife or your friend or your parent or whatever, or your minister, and they'd maybe pull you aside and they'd kind of help steer you. And if you continued acting out, maybe you'd get clipped, you'd get shamed, something would happen. Right. And these days it just feels like we're all in our little digitally connected, like hyper warrens.
Well, let's go down that rabbit hole. Because I mean, this is interesting because, and there's plenty of buzz and talk in the world about different scenarios that are cataclysmic scenarios. EMPs in America, or there's a conflict with Russia and Ukraine, and there's the discussion of, we might bomb you and you might bomb us. Like there's these Cold War type discussions bubbling back up, and the potential for grid failure, for, I think even at Davos the last week, there was a discussion about a viral bug in the internet could spread 12 times or 10 times faster than COVID and bring systems down. And how would our world function without our digital systems? And should we run
super duper well?
Right. So let's go down to okay, let's just say that let's call it say there's an internet bug,
Mr. Robot hack,
and it all turns off.
Yes, dude, I think about that all the time because if you go back to like ancient Egypt, right? We have a disproportionate amount of information from the early and middle kingdoms. Right around the time they decided, hey man, carving in stone tablets is a little old school. Let's do this rad new tech called papyrus, right? And papyrus doesn't last as well as stone, go figure.
Right.
So we don't know shit about the most recent and modern version of ancient Egypt, largely because it was a data record storage issue. So, you think that in a heartbeat, we could go back to like 1989 library card catalogs, and if it wasn't printed on dead trees, we don't have it anymore.
Right.
And we would just have this slippage, and all of the bits and bytes, all of the memes, all of the concepts, all of the ink virtually spilled over the last quarter century on the internet would simply evaporate or be inaccessible and illegible, even if it was still on somebody's hard drive someplace. It wouldn't be interoperable.
Well, even the physical operable world. We had this ice storm in Texas, and there was grids going out. There was people that, my gas is attached to the electrical grid. Yeah, there's a pump that pumps the natural gas to your house. You have no power. You have no water. And we could, and I don't want to scare the crap out of everybody, but anything can happen in the world. We could get to a situation at some point where we go from 2020 to 1850, back to before my grandmother was born, to 1910, to the year she was born, like technologically. That could happen. Yeah. And I don't know if that happened, if it lasted for, the 4 or 5 days that we had really bad ice here before things started to heal. We could all see here, man, if this went on for 2 more weeks. this would be a terrific shit show.
Oh yeah.
And what if we had and that there was this discussion here that, hey, if this grid goes down in Texas fully, it may take us 6 weeks to get it back up.
No, exactly, dude. And we were 4 minutes and 36 seconds away from systemic Texas grid collapse, burnout, blown transformers, and literally, like you said, 4 months to come back. And there was a Nobel Prize winning economist that went to Burning Man a couple of years ago because he wanted to study Burning Man as elective refugee camp. Right, here's this place, super hostile desert, middle of nowhere, zero any amenities or resources. How does this city of 75,000 people just appear, self-organize, do all these things? And my first thought to him was like, buddy, if you really wanted to see this, like let's run out the clock. Don't come for 5 days. Let's go for 21 days and see what happens the first day that everybody's gasoline generators and air conditioners and ice machines break. And we will see how groovy and cooperative this law is. Right, when they're out of drugs and out of gas. And
water's running thin in the desert.
Yes.
No, there's nobody making popsicles anymore.
Exactly. So yes, I think that there's, without a doubt, this is back. I mean, hell, Sweden as a government released pamphlets, I think in 2015, that was like, hey, citizens, you need to get your shit together. And here's 3 likely outcomes. There's ecological or climatic disruption. There's some form of potentially, bio event like we're experiencing. And then there was invasion by Russia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they're neighbors.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Finland's a hop and a skip, right?
Yeah.
And they've got history, right? So the idea there was get your shit together. And here's what every household should have. And it was basically, it was just all the basics, just good old-fashioned, Boy Scout 10 essentials.
It's funny because I forgot, just as time passes, I owe you a huge thank you, and so does our audience. And that Jamie's actually the person who helped us come up with our food survival list for Intellihelp.
Oh, no way.
You remember that?
Yeah.
It was but it was a year ago. So I was like, oh, he actually, because you have so much experience in the survival community and how to survive in the wilderness, that you were like, oh no, people do need sugar. People do need jam. The things that we think they need, rice and beans is their basics. You're the guy that taught me 7% of the world survives daily on rice and beans. Like there's all of these very simple things you can do and have in your home that you can cook 50 different ways with if you just have the 25 right ingredients and make this very simple. So I want to get back to this in a minute, but I'll pursue that rabbit hole with me for a minute. When you think about survivalism in an individual's home, what are the types of things that you would give people advice to say, hey, just in case someone walks by America and kicks the plug out of the wall for a couple weeks, what should you do? What should you have?
Well, and also just to clarify, I'm not, a survivalist. What we did is we did expeditions, mountaineering, ski touring, just things that got us into beautiful, wild places. And and the cost of, or the requirement to get to spend time comfortably in those places is to learn how to camp. Right, is to learn how to be a self-sufficient portable nomad. Right. And so that's where, the skills are a subset to get to really rich and meaningful experiences versus hunkered in the basement with canned goods and a rifle, right? But that said, if you're going on a backpacking trip or a canyoneering trip, you want to make sure you have shelter and you can sleep warm and dry, right? You can suffer a ton during the day, like literally like pissing down rain every stitch of your clothing, like squelchy boots. If you got a dry sleeping bag and a place to stay dry, that is massive. You have to have access to water, drinkable water, right? If you don't do that, it's curtains in 24 hours, right? You have to have food source and an ability to cook. You have to have some form of navigation to understand where you are and some form of communication and medicine. And if you have those things, then you can thrive in crazy, like an unseasonable 3-foot blizzard. You can have lightning and thunder and floods. You can have wicked cold. You can have blazing heat. You can navigate based on your own wits and skill sets and actually have a good time. And even, in fact, you'll appreciate this, the Seattle Mountaineers, right? They have a bumper sticker, your worst nightmare is my vacation. Yeah. Right? And another one of theirs is there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. Right? And so you take that, you're like, okay, we're just humans on this earth. We've been here a while, right? We should be capable and competent. And so for at home, it's pretty much a 1-to-1, which is, back to your, electricity. Do you have alternate lighting? Phone or iPad charging, right? So some form of communications, right? And potentially some refrigeration or some other things, depending on how robust. But at a minimum, light and communication, right? And then, do you have some form of water procurement or purification that leaves you not dependent on a pipe coming from the water main or from a well? And so can you do that? Do you have some form of, and this is just a goofy thing of, do we like to do it? Is it a pain in the ass to have done it and store it and then have it all go old or not ever want to eat it? Like, several months of reliable food if you got it, and hunger is the best spice, so it doesn't have to be gourmet. But the idea, if it was between you and going hungry, you'd be super stoked to eat those things. And can you create a pantry, to your point about the Intellihelp list, right? That is Lego blocks, right? You can make lots of different things. It's not all microwave prepackaged stuff. It's raw materials that go well in a bunch of different combos, right? And then definitely some form of, I'm a massive advocate for any parent of a teenager, as well as for ourselves, is just taking a wilderness medicine course at REI. They're run by a great outfit called National Outdoor Leadership School. It's some of the best experiential learning and biology class you could ever have. It is a crash course in how does your body, how does anybody work? And it's a basic sense of, it's based on wilderness medicine, which sounds like many folks will go, oh, I have no interest in ever going out there. That's not for me. But the technical term of wilderness medicine is just basically any time that is further from 2 hours to definitive medical care.
Yeah, it's first aid and triage for...
Yes, it's just not any call 911.
Right.
Right? It's, we're on deck. And I actually have to first do no harm, and I have to do my level best to kind of stabilize the situation. And it is one of the most empowering things that anybody could ever learn. And then pay attention. And the other, the same way that wilderness medicine instructors will say, the most important tool in your med kit is between your ears.
Yeah.
Right? And you could say that the most important tool in our survival kit is our social capital. Yep. It's actually each other in connection and in relation to each other. And we often forget that stuff. Often we'll actually pull up the drawbridge and get even more isolated. Right. Versus lowering it and inviting everybody in to shelter from the storm.
Well, the first decision that you have to make is, I'm going to be responsible for myself.
Yep.
And that's a fundamental decision, but we have to make that. And you have to go, okay, you know what? I might not need to have 58 rolls of toilet paper in the house, but I need to have some staples that are real, some understanding of first aid for myself. I need to be able to be self-sufficient for a period of time, all the time. I need just to have that, to be ready.
I think that's just good citizenship 101.
Right. But a lot of us we think, well, I can just run down to. Mm-hmm. Like when this whole shebang started, I thought, well, I don't know how grocery stores and stuff were closing. And because of COVID a year ago, I had a whole bunch of dried milk stored. Like, there's no way in hell I want to drink dried milk ever. Yep. But I had it. Mm-hmm. And I took it and I mixed some of it up, shook it up in the shaker, put it in the fridge overnight. The next morning, I utilized it in my latte maker. I'm like, that actually is good.
Nice.
Like, I could, if I got down to it where I needed to survive, I could survive on simple things that, you find a way. But you got to have the thing to find the way first. You have to have the rice, the beans, the dried milk, or whatever the heck it is in your home to take care of yourself.
I mean, we're basically just deconditioned zoo animals right now. So then any steps towards it does not have to be fear-based or survivalist-based. It can just be empowerment and independence-based, which is like, I'd like to take a little more responsibility. Like, I'd like when I flick our light switches on to know that it's from photons harvested off of our roof and stored in a badass high-tech lithium battery, because that's rad and it's kind of fun, than some random coal-fired power plant in northern New Mexico. Right. I just like to know that. And I'd like to also, watch those numbers go up and down, because it's not just free and infinite, and actually be like, turn off the light, kids. Or who left the, who left the oven on? What the fuck? Right. Like, those are important. It's like living on a boat.
Right.
Or something. Just
finite resources and deal with themselves.
Anything where you have a closed loop system, where you have awareness. It would be the same in the backcountry. You don't leave your stove leaking gas or burning longer than you need it. Right. Because you're carrying it. Yeah. And you could run out. So let's not. And I just think, obviously, most people in the world live that way. Yeah. Right? The bottom 4 billion do, which is, how do we ever juggle scarce resources to string together our days and weeks and years? And it just feels like, what is it? If every person on the planet stepped up to the U.S. and Western Europe, actually specifically U.S. levels of consumption, it would require, I think it's 4 planets of resources.
Yeah.
So, there's all sorts of, arguments about techno innovation, blah, blah, blah. But if you just take that at back of the envelope reality, then you're like, okay, so we got to give some back, right, to level this out.
And we got to tighten this up.
And we got to lift a bunch up.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of us living in 2x4 vinyl, poorly insulated boxes, heated and cooled with extravagantly wasteful electric energy, and with every single light and every single screen pumping it out, like ad infinitum, and crazy amounts of food spoilage and waste and crazy amounts of packaging and just insane levels of egregiously poorly designed consumption.
Yeah.
Right? We're probably going to need to lean into that one. and I
pick on this as savagely constantly, but it's my I have a pet peeve for Lunchables.
Ooh, yeah, they are.
Because
anathema.
Right? Because there's the box, then the plastic tray, then the thing inside with 4 slices of mechanized cheese, 4 slices of mechanized meat, 4 mechanized cracker, and it's like the box has probably got more nutritional value than the contents.
Yeah,
that like the whole thing is like an affront to me,
dude. I mean, my heart just aches picturing children reaching into their packs and opening that up, and then what is it like the commercial? Do they feel loved by mommy and daddy because they cared enough to get them? They're legit Oscar Mayer Lunchables like their friends have, or are they like, oh my God, I'm eating like factory splooge and my soul is slowly dying?
Right?
What about that?
Yeah, just a weird thing. An apple. Like we could make a snack for kids so much simpler, and it's just. But it's the IKEA version of food. Like there's all of these things in our world that we're going, oh, why did we
flat pack, some assembly required?
Yeah. So, why the title? Recapture the Rapture. What rapture are we talking about, and how do we get there?
Well, it was kind of a play on 2 versions of the word. So the first, I was inspired by that W.B. Yeats poem, The Second Coming. And he, it's super doom and gloomy. It's very spooky. But then he has a line towards the end where he says, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. And that really just haunted me. And it certainly seemed, as we've been seeing the fragmentation of our civil discourse, that that's exactly what's been going on. Right? We've got a bunch of extremes hijacking the mic of our collective conversation. And then I was like, so the best lack all conviction. Well, it's like, what that the best of us, the rest of us, the 99% that are not in those far, far extremes. Where's that voice? And how do we reclaim our passionate intensity? Right? And so that's the lowercase rapture. Like, how do I get right with myself, with my family, with my relationships, with my body, with the world, and with whatever explanation of things I subscribe to? And then how do I act in integrity and congruence from there, and hopefully courageously and creatively? And then, the uppercase rapture is just that idea of, the theology of there's going to be an end time coming, and then the blessed will be beamed on up to the mothership.
Right.
And that's what, then that's when I was starting to see the notion of the rapture ideologies around the world. And it's not just traditional religious beliefs, it's techno-utopian ones. It's the singularity, uploading our consciousness to computers, disappearing into VR worlds in the Matrix. It's space colonies in Mars as we leave the smoldering husk of our former home. It's a whole bunch of them. It's even seasteading and blockchain and cryptocurrencies. It's psychedelic renaissance. Once you see,
like everybody's got a version of escaping now into a different future.
Yeah, where we can buy. Here's the promise: if you sign up, if you get in, then we're going to leapfrog this whole train wreck, and just cut straight to the happily ever after.
And you and I have talked about this in a number of different contexts. But one of the things that I really liked about this was, let's assume that a person is a rapture person of Christian faith or a rapture person of tech faith. You come at this from the perspective of, what if nobody's coming to save us and we're stuck here? Now, how do we behave? What are the things, how do we think and do if we actually are going to, let's just assume that we actually have to be responsible to each other and to ourselves. How would we do that?
Yeah.
Because that's where and I really appreciated that perspective, because it boils down to personal responsibility, societal responsibility, cultural responsibility. It's saying we are kind of stuck here right now. Let's just assume we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, it is a quantum leap from current grievance politics, and if this doesn't work for me, if this isn't good for me, fuck it, I'm going to torpedo the whole thing.
Yep.
Right. So there is some, just like you just got to make a pledge of like, whoa, and everybody's going to come down differently, but it could be as strong as we could second guess how many people are on this planet right now. We can second guess a whole bunch of things that have happened in the last few thousand years since we've been paying attention and taking notes, right? But on the other hand, WYSIWYG, like what you see is what you get, and we are where we are. And do we take a claim for trying to get all humans, right, through any form of contractions, disturbances, or challenges? Do we have just an ethical pledge? Now, some people might not, right? Some people may say, actually, no way. It's a crazy out there, and half these people we don't agree with or in opposition to.
I do want to have it down.
Yeah, or let half of it burn, right? But we're gonna shrink the tent, right? So my sense is that you could just do that. You could just work backwards from like ethical first principles, because to say anything else would be horrific. Right? Or you can rationalize something else and say that it's not so bad, right? But the other is...
Or you can say something horrific.
Yeah, right? And
Which
more
is
and more
going
people
on.
are. More and more people are saying the quieter parts out loud.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. And it's not just the right? It's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene, talking about Anglo-Saxon heritage stuff. Yeah. It's, Conchi New Agers talking about all the Cabo people, who are eating processed refined sugars and flours and are obese and diabetic, and they're the ones who are going to get clipped by this corona thing anyway, and we're keeping our vibes high with our supplements and our mindfulness. And in fact, we are the evolutionary vanguard that's going to make it through this transition of times, and we're going to reset Gaia so that it restores the carrying capacity. Like implicit is like Stalin and Mao, like loss of billions of lives along the way.
Yeah, but I'm morally superior because
you're like, you just said, what the fuck did you just say? Like, have you thought this through to where this goes? Because it's not as groovy at the end.
Yeah.
Right? So my sense there is back to culture architecture, what we absolutely need. And Harvard Divinity School, they have a rad project called the Sacred Design Lab. Mm-hmm. And they've basically been investigating what does post-traditional religiosity or belief look like for millennials, for Gen Yers, for everybody else, and what forms is it taking? And they came up with 3 essential nutrients of communities of belief and faith, which was healing, inspiration, and connection.
Okay,
right?
Go through healing. What does that mean to them?
Well, so obviously within an organized religious context, it's going into faith, into worship, into whatever these things are, and probably a little banged up and broken. Mm-hmm. Quite often, sometimes it's to celebrate, but it's often to seek sanctuary, right? Like, holy smokes, this is an island in my storm,
okay,
right? And some, as we talked earlier, some ritual and even cultural, and maybe even metaphysical atonement, some sense of like reset the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yep.
Right? You're fresh, you're new, you're blessed, you're forgiven, you're whatever it is, and maybe and you're a part of us, and that connectivity. So like the connection typically comes from, it's kind of a 3-legged stool, right? There's inspiration to remember the deeper purpose of our life, to remember possibility, maybe even grace, beauty, awe, any of the things that scientists are now showing are essential and really, really helpful. The Japanese do forest bathing, right? Like go stand in the big trees. Any of it could be a cathedral, right? So reconnect with inspiration, my reason for being beyond just the day-to-day grind, right? And I've remembered that. And then some form of the healing, both individual and communal, right? And then typically connection, community, like an actual sense of belonging beyond my isolated, lonely self. And those 3 components, like we desperately need them. When anybody gets anywhere close to nailing those, they take, even in the marketplace, right? If you can provide those things, again, Tony Robbins, Soul Cycle, CrossFit, you can take a look at a bunch of different exponentially, explosive growth companies that have done so without conventional marketing or go-to-market strategies, right? And they're providing the things that used to be delivered via church, and now it's in the realm of consumer choices, experiences, goods and services.
In the middle there's a fly in the wine that we got to figure out how to get out, and that is forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because we're in the midst of a culture right now that's going to bring up something you did 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and now we got cancel culture. You said that, and it doesn't seem that, one, if everybody's got something in their past that they don't want dug up, and it gets dug up. It's not like, 20 years ago, I should have just exposed that I did that myself, and I should have just come out and publicly announced it and apologized for it. No, everybody's got a sin that they've hidden. But now, hey, I found your sin. We're going to pull it out in the public. Are we going to even allow you to say, hey, I was wrong? Or are we going to say I was wrong? Like that ability for remorse without retribution, does that exist anymore? Is there a path to that?
Well, I think the same way like Mandela had that Truth and Reconciliation Committee post-apartheid, right? All sorts of grief and trauma, horrendousness. How do we do this, right? And I think back to the notion of like inspiration, celebration, and healing en route to connection. We could go a long way to kind of instituting, standing up, groove and reconciliation committees. Which is literally like, let's get together and celebrate, make a joyful sound, shake our bones, like whatever format that takes. Right? It could be Zumba. It could. There's a cathedral in San Francisco that's been doing the Church of Beyonce, right? Where they just do Beyonce anthems as liturgy, as service, and they raise the roof, and it's gone viral. It's around the world now, right? So it can be anything. It could be your Hook'em Horns football tailgates.
Right.
Right. There's a sense of communitas, but there's also when people are in those states. Right. And this is the neurochemistry of it, especially high serotonin, high oxytocin, high prolactin, dopamine, quite often, a host of things, but definitely a lot of the feel good, feel safe, feel connected to who I'm with neurochemistry. It allows us, and MAPS doing research on PTSD and MDMA therapy has been demonstrating this clinically, which is it allows us to lay our burdens down. It allows us to release and defrag our nervous systems from trauma. And it also can, particularly within some form of, even creatively ritualized form, meaning at this time we kind of do this thing this way, right? Could be, basically in that state, I'm far more prone to forgive my neighbor. I'm far more prone to shake hands and make up. I'm far more prone to let bygones be. And as a result, because we don't have the time to litigate and relitigate every personal slight and grievance in all directions.
Right. No, but we certainly...
But batch forgiveness, right? So there's definitely, like there's micro PTSD and there's PTSD. Like PTSD is adverse life events. You get the shit knocked out of you. You break a bone. You experience violence. You have some deep binding set, and all the hits happen at once. But like micro PTSD is just the incrementalist, like sitting in an office chair and staring at Zoom for a year and a half and wondering why your elbows and your eyes are out and your back are all jacked, right? And we are right now fibrillating in hair trigger reactivity to our collective accumulated micro PTSD. That's the stuff that is deeply amenable to batch forgiveness, right? Just clock everybody up to feelings of happiness, contentment, joy, compassion, right? Inspiration. And then be like, okay, that Hawaiian poem, like, I am sorry, please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Like, can you imagine just being in a circle of people singing in some form of step, movement, chant, repetition, and making eye contact and making, and going around the room. And you're not actually, I don't have a beef with that particular person or you with me necessarily. There will be times where that lines up and you're like, whoa, this is kind of interesting. But then the rest of it is like we are cathartically enacting archetypal theater of forgiveness on behalf of us all. Right? And then you go home and you're just a little looser. You're just a little lighter. And your suitcase, we're all just carpetbaggers of catharsis these days, right? Yeah. We lug our grief and our shame and our pain and our stories around with us like there's something precious. It's like blowing your nose on a hanky and sticking that shit back in your pocket.
Well, and every time you remembering the last time you remembered it, and it gets worse and worse and worse because you're not really remembering what happened. You're remembering the last time you remembered what happened. And
yeah.
You start to carve that story out in stone in your mind, and the memory is actually way worse than the experience. It's like when you go to your childhood home and you go, "Oh, that house was not that big. My bedroom was so small."
Yes.
Like there's these things that our mind does that aren't accurate.
What a horrendous shag carpet is that?
Yeah. Imagine that. Well, one of the pieces here, though, is really fundamental in basic in, you know, I teach classes in creativity a lot. And one of the things I have all of my students do on a daily basis is take vitamins and supplements, fish oil for your brain, kind of the Daniel Amen approach to like get little acetyl-L-carnitine so that your neurons are firing, and go for a walk with your headphones in with nothing turned on. So you're forced to listen to your heartbeat and your breathing.
Nice. So
that you're in your body, but that right there allows you to like live with your actual thoughts, have a conversation. That's the beginning of creativity, is getting yourself kind of in a place where you can do that. How do you sense that? Do you feel like, hey, you know, get hydrated and have some good nutrition to even start? Like that has such a profound effect in getting the mechanisms right in the body and brain before you can be right in the world. Disagree?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. We often, like, I mean, again, we're all suckers for a hockey stick happy ending story. And whether it's you can biohack your way to permanent, stable greatness, or we can create a society that works for everybody, that kind of thing, right? But really, it almost feels like we're just a battery bank, right? And it's this expanding sphere of care, concern, and potentially choice or impact from me now. So singular individual present tense, right? Which is if I'm hungry or I'm slipping into a diabetic coma or I'm having some, you know, destabilized event, then it's just me now. I just got to look after that. I'm not going to be a lick of good to anybody else. But if I can manage my personal productivity, my diet, my rest, my hydration, mindfulness, breath, embodiment, movement, all the things, but basically table stakes things, then maybe I can show up for a partner and maybe members of my family, right? I can expand my sphere of concern and I can look after me and them now. And if we get decent at it, I might even be like me and them now and next. I actually start forecasting and planning and strategizing. And then if my family's thriving, right, then maybe I can also help lead my community. My sphere of concern can expand and out to my country, out to the world. And you get whacked on the head with a hammer, you're back to the bottom of the slide. Me now, ow. Right? Yeah. And so it's forever pulsing based on both resources, conditions, and objectives. How much gas in the tank do I have to accomplish that thing for as many people? Because ultimately it can go all the way out to full care and concern for everyone, everywhere, everyone. Right? That's sort of the sainted or bodhisattvic kind of perspective, which is I'm just holding it down for everyone there's ever been and will be. And that's rare and fragile. And based on optimal conditions or prodigious talent, right? And the rest of us are slingshotting up and down that sliding scale, depending on how our days and lives go. Does that track for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to ask you to do something that's completely out of character and completely uncomfortable for the English.
Okay.
You still have enough English in you that this is going to be uncomfortable for you.
Okay, Jesus.
I know.
Okay.
No, but it's people like simple. Like if I can get things down to a fortune cookie.
Yep.
So what's in it for me?
Time traveling sex magic to save the world just in time.
Time traveling sex magic to save the world just in time.
How's that?
It's pretty good, huh? That's what's in it for me. The thing that I loved. Well, let's talk about music before I wrap that conversation around the book. But talk about the chapter on music in here and how music affects us and the benefit, because this is something that everybody can access today in their life.
Yeah, I mean, look. I think we don't need to overcomplicate to state the obvious that music is the food of love, right? I mean, it makes our worlds go round. And for anybody that's ever had their favorite tune come on the radio, or and turn it up to 11 and roll down the windows and belt it out, or singing it in the shower, like, it soothes our souls and it profoundly connects us. And the neuroscience and the anthropology is fascinating, right? It's the idea that, and I did not know this, but Daniel Levitin, who's at McGill in Canada, right? He wrote This Is Your Brain on Music. He had actually, before he was a professor, he was actually like some pretty significant producer in the music industry. And he toured with like crazy rock bands and all kinds of things. It was a little like almost famous. So he's an insider who then went academic. And he makes the case that music actually even precedes human language. That there's archaeological evidence of bone flutes that are 50,000 years old, and that that's prior to early forms of language. That sort of doesn't come along like for like another 30 or 40,000 years BCE, and so they're like, okay, so and clearly bone flutes weren't the first, right? You probably had drums, you had rattles, you had other things, and that was actually one of our proto-communication languages. So we would organize for hunts. We would gather around caveman TV and the fire, right? We would do all the things we did. And we used call and response. We used listening and signaling. We used all of these things as ways to create cohesion amongst a bunch of otherwise weak and naked, hairless tribal primates. So you're like, damn, that's awesome, right? And then you go into like how prevalent and prominent music is. And one of the interesting things, there's only been the last 300 years where music wasn't a co-creative, participatory, and kinetic activity for a community. You all sung and danced. And in fact, one of the anthropologists had literally gone to Ghana doing an ethnography, like trying to study these people. And they're like, oh, hey, we're going to do some music tonight. And he's like, okay, great. I'm going to come along and watch. And they're like, get in here, like move, like your turn's coming up. Like, and he's like, what? No, I'm not the, and they're like, are you kidding? This is what music is. And so that sense of us listening again with earbuds and iPods and just picking the song we want to listen to. We're not even listening to albums anymore. Right. We're not even consuming music the way the artist intended it.
Right.
Right. So the idea that getting back into interactive, co-creative music and movement together is super rad. And Robin Dunbar at Oxford, most folks know him famously for his Dunbar number. The 150 people is about the most you can hold together. But he also studied the San Bushmen in the Kalahari. And he found something fascinating. He said they would conduct trance dances. So they would literally drum and dance and move until they would all shift into a trance state. And it was, one of the central linchpins of their social rituals. But he noticed that when things got worse in their world, when things were less stable, they were more strife-filled, when people were starting to get salty and crusty with each other, they had more trance dances, not less. So rather than it being celebrations for good times only, it was medicine. And it actually allowed them to discharge back to this micro-PTSD and grievances and forgiveness, right? They actually sweated their prayers. Right. That's what I mean about the Groove and Reconciliation Committee is can we do that in a way, because right now it's quite tribalized. You can go to a Garth Brooks concert or a Beyonce concert or a Fish concert, just radically different communities, and they wouldn't see the humanity in each other filing out of the stadiums. Yeah. Right. So the question is do we have some kind of, Arcana Americana? Do we have can we dust off the American songbook that's everybody's and orient around some of that?
There's this music that, I'm sure it's obvious to you, but it's not obvious to everybody, is that it's music, whether it's recorded or live or whatever the version of it is, it's like a cake mold, and you're going to fit it. It does something to your brain. Mm-hmm. Hear that song and it's like you're the water and it's the egg crate and you fit it. It actually is an external thing that does something to your physiology of your brain and your body. From the external, not unlike the sun giving you a sunburn. Your body's going to respond to that in wavelength forms and waveforms and brain patterns. We liken it in my work to comedy. We tell people, hey, why do you like to go see a comedian? They're like, well, they make me laugh. Mm-hmm. But what a comedian does is something very specific. A comedian takes two disparate ideas that you have, existing paradigms, and connects them in a way you've never had them connected. Mm-hmm. And they make relations that you've never had. Well, they're making new neural connections for you. which releases serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin. All these things are released when you see a comedy show. You're essentially taking your brain, and through the tool of language or body, how the body works, and it's like your brain is a biplane, and you're giving them the stick, and they're flying your brain around. And it's very, very enjoyable. You're like, oh my God, I had a great time at that show, because you gave yourself over, the organ of your brain, you gave over to that person through the vehicle of language and movement. And music does the same thing.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
we can have that experience. We go, oh, it's not just a song. It's
a sonic landscape. I mean, good.
It's a treatment.
Yeah, good, really powerful, transcendent music is a carrier wave for consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a reason that people will often combine their intoxicants of choice with their favorite musical experiences. People will get lit, right, to go dance. And part of that is to get around prefrontal cortical executive function, default mode network control of my neurotic inner narrative. They want to knock that fucker out and shake their bones, right? And that can be, obviously it's super fun. We don't, like that, those can be some of the most righteous times a person can have, and they're also salubrious, right? They're super healthy.
Well, and when you literally are a radio, which means you're receiving frequency, but you're also sending out frequency. So when you are with 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people around a campfire at a concert, and that wave's being produced, there is a wavelength interaction where it's that, and you see this fundamentally in religions.
You see it at INSEAD business school. They did it.
Yeah,
they did
chant, the whole, whatever it is. I think Tony Robbins does this crowd.
Yeah, super. He does tons of entrainment.
Yeah, and you get that going, and it makes people feel elated, part of something, connected. Like there's all of this relief in the tribalism of that moment, no matter what the tribe is.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's just a question. The question is okay, since those psychosocial technologies are kind of out there, and most people have learned to use them and potentially even commodify them or weaponize them.
Right.
And the question is in service of what?
In service of what?
Now that we have merged or glimpsed kind of some form of mind meld, right? What Victor Turner at UChicago called communitas, right? Some deep drop into intersubjective shared reality. And it's super fun, and it's profound and powerful and feels awesome, and is often quite information rich, heightened innovation, creativity. So it's valuable, right? On a bunch of different parameters. Then what do we do with it? Right? What is the outcome or intention? Because quite often, right, we will get, and I think this is in some respects the full circle in the book, right? Demagogues, right? People who are looking to weaponize or commodify are basically taking people in the tragic. They're promising them transcendence. They're delivering those movements, and it could be at a political rally, it could be at a personal growth workshop, it could be at a rock concert.
It could be a piece of tech.
Yep. And then once there, are now mobilizing and steering people back to that pre-tragic, just so story that puts you at the center and everyone's special cupcake, and you deserve to get what's yours. Versus we could also, in those moments, rally and invoke the better angels of our nature, right? Rally what MLK called soul force, right? And you hit that note, and it rings in everybody's souls, right? And they know it to be more profoundly true.
Right.
Than the chasing long necks and flicking my lighter and getting hammered at the show.
Right.
You're like, oh, you're reminding me of something I forgot. You're reminding me of a deeper truth and a deeper possibility. And I am a visceral yes to this. Maybe there could be a visceral no to it as well. But like if it's yours to hear.
It's I ask those questions at the top is I ask the questions of who do you admire and the character traits, because I want you to tell us who you are and the audience who you are. And that's the easiest way to describe yourself without talking great about yourself. Is, hey, these are the people I admire and these are the character traits. And every time you rattle off one of those, I'm going to go, yep, that's Jamie Wheal. I know who he is. And it's a short code for people to get to know you. And in this sense, you're saying, this is a short code for a character trait in myself, a higher self, that it's empathy, it's love, it's engagement, whatever it is, it's humility, whatever you're pulling out in that moment is really a character trait. And that's what we've learned at the end of our branding exercises in our work is, hey, at Wharton, we used to have 5 brand pillars and all of this nonsense. And now it's just simply one character trait per brand. What does it mean? When I become the Prius person, am I ecologically and frugal and green? And if I'm the Tesla person, yeah, it's still a green car, but there's some prestige associated with it. There's something about it.
Be a douche. Yeah.
Yeah, right? It's entirely impossible. But what's the equal sign character trait here? I read this book. Mm-hmm. Who do I become?
Courageous.
Going to give me some courage.
Yeah, but real courage.
Yeah.
Like the hard-earned and hard-won, the kind you can trust in yourself and in action.
That's who doesn't want or need that right now? Like there's a lot of that lacking in the world. And there's a lot of people that have a desperate desire, myself included, to have that. I mean, that's kind of where this whole last year came for us. Is like, man, this is a mess. Step into it, lean into it. Don't run from it. How do we lean into this and make something positive out of whatever the soup we're in right now? And I'm impressed that you did this. It's a great work. The thing I love about this, your writing, is you don't tell people what to think. You tell them how. And that's the best tool in the world, is to get people to think what they need to think on their own. Just, hey, here's some frameworks to work with. What do you think? It's not a preach. It's not like, oh, this is the answer. You got to come to this conclusion because I'm so freaking right, which a lot of content, particularly in the, I wouldn't even call this a self-help book. It's not.
God, no.
It's not even on that spectrum. It's a framework of, hey, look at the world through this lens and this lens and this lens. It's kind of a kaleidoscopic, like, let's try a few lenses on. Are you starting to get the picture now that you've seen it from 4 or 5 different angles? Now, what could you do with a little courage? Because courage begets action. Mm-hmm. You can't be courageous and not act. You have to take a step if you're courageous by definition.
Yeah.
Courage doesn't stand on the sideline.
Yeah, or cease to be the thing. That's interesting. It's really neat. So it's a value or an ideal that actually has an implicate verb attached. You can't duck acting upon it.
Yeah.
Neat. And my sense is, I don't know if you ever saw that funny TED Talk. It was about like the lone crazy guy dancing and then the dude who follows the dancer. And it was just it was just a footage of a concert at the Gorge in Washington.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And it was just one lone crazy guy dancing. It was like that guy, most people would think he's the entrepreneur or he's the leader. No, it's actually this guy. And then like the second guy comes up and starts dancing. And then the next thing you know, like every 15 minutes, and this really funny voiceover is an entire crowd all getting up and starting to dance. And the point is like, yeah, there's no crazies.
This came out not that long ago.
For a few years, but you might have just come across.
I think I just came across it.
And the point being is that yes, courage potentially has that impetus for action, but there is a chain reaction that once that happens, once somebody puts a stake in the ground and is coming from that soul force place, right? Which is because the original was Gandhi's, and he called it truth force. So you're like, and it meant alignment, like impeccable alignment with the integrity of your stand and your being. And then nothing can move you. So all we need is we just need early adopters. We just need bold folks, somebody just to be like, here's my stand, here's my song. And then that can create cascades, because suddenly now people look around and go, oh my God, that's possible, that's doable. And then at some point, the tipping point is, and I'm now the odd one out if I don't.
Right.
Or I can't not now that I've seen that.
And you don't have to write.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is just take the step, because you're going to get a step after that. You can pivot. Like, it's okay to be courageous, and like there'll be the next step. You just don't have to ring the bell perfectly the first time out. You can.
It's the start by starting, and I got a huge amount of inspiration. I was giving a talk at MIT with Nancy Keene, who's she's an historian at Harvard Business School, which is kind of an interesting position, I guess, But she wrote a book called Forged in Crisis, and it's about Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, Dietrich von Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who tried to assassinate Hitler and then got shot for his troubles. Rachel Carson from Silent Spring, Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist,
Mm-hmm.
and Abe Lincoln. And the thing that's so, because I mean, and obviously people are all familiar with those folks. You can Wikipedia them. There's tons of grade school textbooks about them, all that kind of stuff. And they're almost always the sort of heroic stories of these people are pivotal members of history that did the great thing. But in Nancy's book, it's, she goes into their letters, what they were thinking at the time, like actual on the ground.
Their self-doubt and their...
Oh my God. And like even just take, I mean, obviously Shackleton was a rolling shit show and he, snatched victory from the jaws of defeat on that one. But like Abe Lincoln, right? We always think, oh, and then Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves. Done. Like good for him. And he was like, no, he was completely out of bullets. He was in utter despair. And the Emancipation Proclamation was a triple overtime Hail Mary to the end zone. He had zero confidence that it was going to work out to do anything, let alone be the linchpin of the Civil War and the American legacy. So that sense of like, hey, we just got to start by starting. And there's no possible way we know how this is all going to go down. But coming from courage and hopefully some love, some compassion, some consideration, right, is the best thing we've got, and it's the only thing we've got, and it's the everything we've got.
We all have this weird thing inside of our belly, in our back, that is, people die, but it's not going to happen to me. And we convince ourselves, and when we hear about someone that we know die, we go, oh, how did that person die? They were close to my age. Oh, they died like this. Oh, well, I don't ride a motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
There's there doesn't seem to be any compassion anymore when you ask that question. Mm-hmm. It's really a question about me and my mortality, not exactly about how that person died. Like
that happens in the extreme sports community. That happens in the special operations community. The idea is like, well, wait, if I can divine that they made a bad judgment I wouldn't have made, then I would have been able to dodge the Reaper that day, right? And not had my ticket punched. And it's fascinating, right? Pilots too.
And the fact of the matter is, you're going to die.
Mm-hmm. And shit happens.
Shit happens and we're all going to die. Like that is, and once you come to that realization of your mortality and go, oh, I have finite time. I don't even know how finite. That should be a positive motivator to go, oh, you know what? I'm not just going to sit here and watch. I'm going to participate and I'm going to do the best I can with what I've got at the moment. And perhaps I'll gain some tools to do something better tomorrow. But I'm going to take an action. I'm going to come forward and I'm going to have some courage. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're missing a lot of that because of all of these electronics and these headphones. And we sit back and go, oh no, I'm an observer here.
Oh, I mean, I remember watching WALL-E, that Pixar movie with our kids. It was like probably 10 years ago now. Yeah. And it was bleak and dystopian. It was all these like super obese folks sitting in floating lazy boys, sipping giant big gulps, jacked into things. And I was like, dear God, this is dark. Like, what are we doing taking our kids to it? And you're like, no, they called it. They called it way early. And that idea that it's not, the Matrix isn't something we're unjacking from to liberate ourselves. We're actually building the fucking thing and plugging ourselves in. And
as a form of pain relief, which is causing pain.
Just clambering on into that vat of goo, man, and jacking in because it seems better. Or at least it just seems like the quickest route to distraction, diversion, and sensation, versus meaning.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm going to do this so I feel alive. Like, is the antithesis of being alive. It's like, oh, you know what I really need is VR. And I need to, no, you don't. You need some actual world. That's fine and I'm not slamming video games or anybody who does that. Everything has its time and its place. And it's the absorption, the complete and utter drowning in these technologies is insanity.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just no dodging the fact that we are tribal primates. Like that is our overwhelming baseline and legacy. And when we ignore that, and we're just heads on sticks, and we're just carrying ourselves around in little mobile environments and 72 degrees at all times, and in a fridge stocked full of high fructose corn syrup, like that's not actually us, and that's not even remotely normal. And when we are feeling ennui or dislocation or despair or anxiety or some nagging sense of having had and lost some infinite thing, like David Foster Wallace, like you're like, yeah, we're right. So we don't have to be Luddites. We don't have to go, paleo fanatics, and tan our own buckskin. But on the other hand, sleeping deeply, moving often, getting outside, making love, being grateful, eating real food, taking, like bathing intentionally, not just a 90-second shower, all these things is how we've always done this thing, and you don't have to be like a retro romantic, right? To say, ooh, all tech is bad. We got to go back to, teepees and wigwams.
No.
It's just saying, look, this is just building blocks of how we do this human thing. And let's dust some of those off, or just use a checklist, just scorecard our current life and what are key nutrients that are missing. And we're probably feeling that deficiency. And isn't it just a ton of fun to dust some of those off and have good times together, building community, building culture, laying down some experiences?
I was going to wrap this up, but I still want to go one more place with you. You're fascinating to talk to, and it's super interesting to me. There's one other drug that we haven't talked about that we have to talk about, and it's the drug of materialism and wealth, of being in the U.S. in particular. And I've traveled the world, but I don't feel this as strongly in other countries as I feel it here. And that is, I'm not okay unless I'm rich, or I'm not okay unless I'm famous. And if I'm rich and famous, I'm even better. And that is we've sold ourselves over and over again in our culture that should be the culmination of a human life, that's who's won. And you know what, I'm going to stop there and let you respond to that.
Yeah, I think of Bill Murray, right, where he's like, everybody wants to be rich and famous. He goes, just try and be rich. See if that doesn't fix about everything, So that sense, what is it, like 34% of the current generation was just surveyed and said their top desire or goal is to be a YouTube star? It was like 6 or 7% were in the doctor and lawyer category. And you're like, wow, okay, that's a thing now.
Yeah.
You do see that kind of rampant hyper-consumerism in emerging societies that have been infected with the American consumptive virus. So like affluent middle-class Chinese, jetting to Paris and London, Hermes bags and LVHM and all that kind of stuff. Like it has jumped the tracks and it shows up in other places, especially
you see
places,
Dubai, you see it. Yeah.
Yes, especially places that had been denied access to material abundance post World War II, whatever. But interestingly, Tim Wu, I think he's at Columbia. He's a law professor and tech professor. I think he's now on the Biden administration. He was also in Obama's, but he coined the term net neutrality back in the day.
Yeah.
And he wrote that kick-ass book, The Master Switch, and then he wrote one called The Attention Merchants, which you would totally dig. It's the history of marketing in America, right? And his point, and this is full circles on circles, which is that 3 of the top 4 like seminal marketing guys were former evangelical preachers.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so the whole notion of like what used to be pitched under a revival tent passing the collection plate is now pitched as soap, or is now pitched as hairspray, or a cigarette brand, or whatever it is. And it's the same thing, which is that the harping on the pain or the need or the yearning, right, was sublimated spiritual yearning. And the language, the structures, the narrative structures, the pops, the moves, the twists, right, the manipulations of the mark, right, were identical. And we then simply transposed being born again or saved or redeemed or whatever the thing would have been to having the thing that the advertisers have told me and promised me will deliver the value or experience or ideal. So like the Lunchables one, that's what I was wondering. I was like, how many kids would have bought the marketing message, which is, this means mommy and daddy love me. They're not giving me those Kroger knockoffs like they tried a month ago, which humiliated me in front of my friends. I fit, I belong, we get to trade, we have vernacular and language, and this is just like on TV.
Yep.
Right? So yeah, my sense is that we could for sure, depose the god of mammon.
How do we get that out of the American arm of hey, I got to be famous and I got to be rich? As having experienced enough people in my life that had that were absolutely, one, miserable,
And two, not that money makes you miserable. Some of them are very happy. It's the other things in life that actually determine whether you're miserable or happy. But one of the things that fame will guarantee you is you will be approached constantly by people who tell you how great you are, which is very easy to get lulled into. And pretty soon you're surrounded by people that are lying to you all of the time, telling you you're great when you're not, but your subconscious knows you're being lied to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you become miserable. I mean, you see this with, I don't want to, point to any particular celebrity, but I could point to 40 of them just by saying that, who you can see they're miserable, and it's because they have this entourage around them.
Yeah. In fact, Stephen Berglass, he's a psychiatrist at Yale, and he wrote a rad book called Reclaiming the Fire. Mm-hmm. And it's about the case for supernova burnout. So he talks about Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, supermodels who want to cut their faces or get addicted to drugs. And the idea is, or rock and roll bands that get surrounded by, hangers-on and groupies. And basically, there's a couple of things. One is like, you have no idea how hard it was to do what I've done, right? And then all I get are microphones shoved in my face, or, people on social, whatever, critiquing when I fall from that.
Yep.
Right. So there's no awareness, like whether it's Roger Federer, why are you failing? Are you getting old? Like, hey, can you just give me some credit, for what I pulled off for how long? Tiger Woods, obviously. And what happens is that they want out. It becomes a prison, and they actually engage in self-sabotage.
Yep.
Right. And so that's
Big
politicians
time.
With crazy mistresses and affairs and stupid ass stuff they're doing in high stakes situations, or where it's Tiger Woods, literally his first car wreck, literally blew up his life.
80 miles an hour
broke his world. Right.
Yeah.
Or Michael Jordan retiring, trying to go play baseball. He's like, I've got to reset the game here. And that was at least volitional.
Right.
But many are just, I will burn this all down.
Yeah.
Right. To get out of this prison house.
And then there's some that manage to weave all the way through. Like, I look at Robert Plant, and I'm like, Robert Plant has literally been a rock and roll god for 50 years now. Seems to be a pretty solid dude. Actually, pretty nice guy. Like lives in kind of the real world.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that everybody who meets him is like, yeah, you're a rock and roll god, but still has managed to navigate it. And you see his conversations when he rarely does an interview and stuff. And he's a pretty normal person, and he's kind of got his psyche together.
I think it's fair to say that he thoroughly got his yayas out by like 1981. I mean, by the time John Bonham dies, that put the brakes on what could have slid into decadence and decline, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was probably a really helpful interrupt. And then, I think being led by his art, right? By being led by his passion for music, back into the Alison Krauss and the folk tradition, and learning to sing harmonies, and like he continued learning and growing.
Yeah, growing and
evolving.
I just saw Pete Townsend talk about this last week, and The Who is another band I followed closely for a long time.
That was my first concert.
Was it really?
RFK Stadium, yeah.
And we got to do a project with Daltrey a few years ago, and I got to talk to him, which was like a huge deal for me. I'm not so much because I grew up in the actors world. My dad was a musician, so the musicians world, those are kind of, I do still get butterflies sometimes with those interviews, but I don't like the actors, like directors are like, oh, shit, who gives a shit? But watching those guys, they didn't figure it out until they were damn near 70, because Daltrey and Townsend have just been these volatile personalities and kind of car crashes in their personal lives until they got to be about 70 years old. And now they're like, I'm watching Townsend last week, and he's like, yeah, it's, I'm learning now. I'm learning new music, and I'm writing new music, and he's starting to talk like a creator again. And he's like, I kind of just figured out that as long as I'm it's like, yeah, I'll play those old songs, but the joy of this, and it was the first time, and I've seen him interviewed a lot because I really followed him, where I went, oh, he went through something in the last 3 or 4 years even, where his personality, and then I saw Daltrey, and I was like, wow, he has changed and got a level of humility, because he had this kind of, I'm pissed off, why am I not the greatest rock and roll star ever? And in my mind, you're like one of the top 10. But in his mind, he never was. And now he's kind of accepted that. Yeah, no. And it's really an interesting, well, he was notorious for being an angry person. and to see them kind of wrap that in. But again, when you look at that and you go, Plant kind of like figured it out a long time ago. And there's a few people that get through the fame thing. And they go, this is just my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, probably true for all of us, which is at some point, how do we set aside our childish things and sack up and grow up and then come into a sort of well-baked, well-seasoned maturity, of being, such effectively going through the phases of life and not stalling out at man-child.
Yeah,
status,
and I think
right?
I think the point that at the end of that for me is they almost wad up the fame and throw it away and go, that wasn't really the thing. That they realize, that wasn't valuable.
Yeah.
And like, it's my wife and my kids and my dogs and my private life.
Well, I mean, it's a distortional mindfuck, right? So the only people who had that kind of asymmetric attention and way less eyeballs would have been nobility and royalty in the past, like a company accompanying a stat, and everybody says, Hollywood's the new royalty, blah, blah, blah. But now, especially with Instagram celebrity and, influencer kind of culture where you can suddenly harness, and people are actively trying to get as much of it as possible, harness eyeballs, harness psychic energy from hundreds to thousands to millions of people. That form of psychoactive carrier wave, right, it's a lot for someone's psychology to handle. I mean, look at Justin Bieber or anyone who just got overwhelmed with it, and there's like, whoa, it has just eclipsed any true sense of myself. Yep. And none of the echolocation I can trust, to your earlier point. Yeah. Right? And so now I'm kind of rudderless.
I think Bieber was like that for a long time. Now he's like, he's going to Bible study weekly. Now, not endorsing Bible study, but he found an anchor where he's like, he's doing some, what you and I would consider to be kind of like normal behaviors that were not the stuff that he did for the last 8 years of, I've lost my mind, rock and roll star. So he's like, and he got married and he's like, okay, I got to figure out how to kind of navigate life or I'm going to die. Because those seems to be the choice for young people. Like they don't realize, that bright light, and then they're dead.
Yeah.
The car into the tree. They end up choking on their own vomit. That was much more fashionable when we were young, choking on your own vomit. I haven't heard anybody do that in a long time. Well, thank you for the time today.
Yeah, man.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
Well, I mean, maybe just the recessional, like the point that you asked me, one word or value that the book would hopefully impart, and I said courage. And I think that's really important. It's not like a Newt Rockney, speech or like follow me over the hill, fellas. It's for all of us to, basically grieve globally. Like pay attention to the wound of the world, the state of things, feel it all, right? It's ours, but thrive locally.
Yeah.
Right. And so weep, don't whimper, right? Reconnect to what is most deeply and abidingly true for us. It's all going to be different, or it might all be exactly the same, but we got to go find it. And then take your stand, sing your song, be a light. And let 1,000 fires burn.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really had to focus on in the last year, I think and it's a very simple mechanism, is when I'm in that dusty place in the morning when I'm first waking up and I'm going, what have I got to do today? And I'm not quite off the pillow, but I know I need to be, is I've taught myself to say, I'm going to be happy and have a good day.
Nice.
Which I never would have said for the first 53 years of my life, or 54 years of my life. That's not even the way I talk to myself. It was like, I would set an objectives for the day, but not an emotional intention for the day. And to set the emotional intention of, you know what, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to have a great day.
That's nice.
It has changed my life just to do that very simple activity.
How did you come to it? What inspired you to do it?
I think there was just so much crap in the world, and I was waking up so much. Like when COVID started and we started Intellihelp, these guys will tell you I was working 20 hours a day for the first 6 weeks. I was sleeping 3-4 hours a night, and I was starting to kind of lose my mind. And
There were definitely some of your social posts. Look, we're getting Blair Witchy. You're like, here I am. It's 3 a.m. I'm hair on fire. Yeah,
turn it off. So I went, no. If I'm gonna personally get through this, I gotta have a compass inside my brain that's functional. Beautiful. And so it was just snapped one day, and I went, you know what? I can't fix the world, but I can fix today in my world.
Yeah,
I got control of this.
Yeah. Well, dude, if you want a bumper sticker for the book, you asked me for, or fortune cookie, right?
Yeah.
It would be stay awake, build stuff, help out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I think that's at the core of it is, and that help is a real huge piece of it is this doing something for other folks, get you out of your own head, and it actually builds self-esteem. It just makes you feel good. And it makes you feel good. Oh, I have some power over in the world by engaging in someone else's life and giving them something a little better.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be expensive. It can be free. Doesn't have to be complicated. So thank you. Thanks for your friendship. Thanks for all of your wisdom. It's, I would say I wish I have the 10th of your vocabulary, but I probably actually do have just about a 10th of your vocabulary. So, but it's always meaningful and well spent time for me.
Yeah, man. Back at you.
All right. Yeah. Be good.